Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host Hali presenting another edition of Defense and Diplomacy. The Nuclear Security Summit, which happens to be the fourth one in line and I suppose the final one, has commenced in Washington DC. When did it begin? What is its genesis? And what are its prospects? These are some of the aspects which we shall be discussing today. But let me not hold between our august participant and you. We are honored to have in the studio today none other than Ambassador Masood Khan. Welcome to the show, sir. I believe you have served 3 years consecutively as what they call the Sherpa, or the representative of Pakistan for the nuclear negotiations as a chief negotiator. So you must be having first-hand knowledge. Please apprise our viewers kindly, sir, about the genesis of this, how it began after the 2009 Prague speech of President Obama.
The precise duration was 6 years. As a matter of fact, I started this role back in 2009, the fall of 2009, and I quit it last year in January, February. So, and I did 3 summits. I mean, I helped Pakistan prepare for 3 summits. So I have a very deep, close association with the nuclear security summit process. You talked about Genesis and its evolution. Well, President Barack Obama, when he assumed office back in 2009, he was very ambitious about non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. And he delivered a very famous speech in Prague in April 2009, where he mentioned quite a few things. One was, of course, FMCT, Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. He talked about ratification of the CTBT, which is held up in the US Senate. The third, of course, was START 2, or as it was called, New START, with the Russian Federation to cut down on nuclear arsenals and nuclear warheads, and there some success was made. And the fourth element was, this was important, this was about nuclear security. He made an announcement about nuclear security. And he said that he set very ambitious goals, that he would lead the international effort to secure all vulnerable nuclear material all around the world in 4 years. Second was that steps would be taken to prevent nuclear terrorism. I think that in pursuance of these goals, the third was to promote accession to CPPNM, Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, and ICSANT is International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Terrorism. So I think that this was a multi-pronged strategy that he adopted. He involved the international community. In the first summit, there were 47 participants. Right now, I think in the last summit, which is this is 2016, is the last summit, there would be 50 plus participants there. The ambition here is to make the world secure. Pakistan was closely associated. We have our own position.
If you permit, sir, before we come to Pakistan, I want to ask you that, as you rightly mentioned, that the goals set by President Obama were very ambitious. And he was expected to have completed them in his first term, which he didn't, but then luckily he got a second term. But now, about 10 months to go in his presidency, so possibly this will be the last summit. What are the chances of a success?
Well, they've already achieved some success. Okay. I think in the past, from the United States point of view, and from the point of view of the allies of the United States, I think more than 1,400 kilograms of HEU, highly enriched uranium, and separated plutonium have been eliminated. And at least a dozen countries have repatriated their nuclear material from about 22 facilities, nuclear facilities. So, and I think that overall there have been new institutions which have come up, the centers of excellence or centers for nuclear training have come up. I think greater awareness has been created worldwide because of the leadership of the United States and personal involvement of President Barack Obama about nuclear security. Some measures have been taken on nuclear transportation, information security, forensic dimension, also safety and security. So some progress has already been made. I think in the process, I mean, of course, there was these communiques and declarations which were issued by summit participants, but there were also what they call house gifts and gift baskets. There were some, these coalitions who came together voluntarily. They focused on implementation, or they made their own commitments. So from that point of view, I think that the summit process has been a success. Let me also tell you that in other areas, this success has not been there, or it's mixed. FMCT is where it was in 2009. CTBT, there has been no movement in the US Senate. With Russia, of course, there was this spurt, there was this progress in the beginning, but the situation is stalled right now, and there's an impasse between the Russian Federation and the United States because of Ukraine. Their whole cooperation on nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms reduction has also suffered.
In fact, it has come to a standstill nearly, but I'm glad you mentioned Russia, because it's very important to note that for the first time, Russia is actually boycotting the nuclear security summit. What impact will it have on the progress of the final summit?
I think it has dented the process. It has hurt the process, because I remember that during the first two summit processes, preparatory processes, Russia was very cooperative. They have their own point of view. They had their own reservations, but they were very forthcoming, and they were collaborating with the United States. So I think that, starting with the 2014 summit, which was held in The Hague, I think that the differences between the Russian Federation and the United States started coming to the surface, and then they widened because of Ukraine and because of their differences in regard to the Middle East. So I think that there, I know I was in New York and in Washington at that time, and I used to talk to high-ranking U.S. officials. They tried their best after Ukraine to bring U.S. Russia dialogue on nuclear issues back on track, but they do not succeed. I think that the Russian objections were that this process was not democratic at all, that there were institutions or forums outside the NSS process which were competent and which had the requisite legitimacy, and they could pursue these goals of nuclear security. They cited the example of IAEA or United Nations or other initiatives that had been taken. So I think that this was the objection. They thought that the United States were trying to lead a process which legitimately belonged to intergovernmental structures. So, but basically it was because of Ukraine.
I understand.
There were difficulties, and that's why.
You were going to mention Pakistan earlier. Incidentally, this is the first time that Pakistan is not being represented by its head of government. And in the last three summits, our prime ministers have been there. And this year, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif had a plan to be there, but because of unfortunate and extraneous circumstances in Pakistan, the terror attack in Lahore has held him back. So do you think his absence is going to make any difference?
It's a pity that he could not go, because Pakistan throughout this process was part of the core group, and we were there always to contribute, and our contribution to the NSS process was acknowledged generously by Secretary of State John Kerry, President Barack Obama repeatedly, also United States NSS team. So I think it's a pity that the Prime Minister could not be there, but the Prime Minister's decision to stay back is justifiable, and everybody understands, and President Barack Obama, in fact, telephoned our Prime Minister to reassure him in this regard, and he said that he understood Pakistan's pain after the Lahore terrorist attack. So I think that On the one hand, his absence is something which would be felt there. On the other, he had to stay back. But let me tell you that the preparatory process was over. Symbolically, we have had a setback, but substantively, I think we are on board, and we've already contributed to the outcome of the summit. And Mr. Tariq Fatmi, who is Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, is there to represent him. So he knows the subject, and he also has been following this process for the past 2 to 3 years. So he understands the summit dynamics.
In the same vein, there have been some serious reservations from some quarters in the United States. Although you mentioned that President Barack Obama and Senator John Kerry and also the NSS leadership has been very appreciative of Pakistan's role. But people like, say, Donald Trump, for example, the other day, he made a very ludicrous statement that since Pakistan has nuclear weapons, so it is a problem state. So does he imply that any state which has nuclear weapons is a problem state?
Mr. Trump is a very controversial figure. He's a very divisive figure in the United States itself. He is popular with his supporters, but he has alienated many groups within the United States. Of course, he takes aim at Pakistan from time to time. Probably he does this to please Indian constituents, Indian American constituents, or probably some other constituents within the United States. He also manifests lack of understanding of international politics time and again. He hasn't had sufficient exposure. As an entrepreneur, he has had exposure to the business world, but he doesn't know the nuances of diplomacy. But this is not about nuances, this is understanding ABC of nuclear diplomacy. He gives such statements, and let's see how his campaign shapes up and what results it produces. In the meantime, I would like to re-emphasize that Pakistan's contribution to the Nuclear Security Summit has been recognized by the United States leadership, and Pakistan's steps on the ground, the measures that we have taken on the ground, have also been acknowledged. I mean, we have established a center of excellence here, and it is called the state-of-the-art, the cutting-edge institution that you have created. You created back in 2012, almost parallel to the duration of the Nuclear Security Summit process, and high-ranking officials from the United States, from IAEA, they have come, and they have recorded their impression that this is, I mean, some of them have used the superlative for Pakistan, that is the best such institution, nuclear training institution, nuclear security training institution. That includes DG, Director General of IAEA. So I think that, and time and again, I mean, the testimonies that have been given by American officials to the United States Congress, they have testified to the security measures that the government of Pakistan, the state of Pakistan, has taken. So I think that we need not worry about that, and we need not be distracted by such statements by presidential hopefuls.
No, we are not distracted by them, but the problem lies elsewhere. People like Bruce Riedel and a few others, they have been, I mean, they've been echoing the words of President Obama about nuclear terrorism. Now, in the garb of that, they are trying to malign Pakistan, that since Pakistan is a victim of terrorism, therefore there is the word they use is a snatch and grab of Pakistani nukes. So would you care to comment on that, sir?
I think that's not a fair assessment. There's a group of analysts in the United States who try to derive such conclusions from time to time, but their methodology is flawed, and their conclusions are unsound. You look at their reports, and they haven't shown a strong research regimen. It's either hearsay or it's whatever they say is speculative. So you don't find that rigor in their research, so-called research. Now, let me tell you that one thing that I want to clarify, Nuclear Security Summit or the process was not and is not about Pakistan. It's about a larger community, because there are two types of states participating in the Nuclear Security Summit, which is starting today, United States time. Now, nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states.
Right.
But all these states have nuclear material. Either it is HEU or it is separated plutonium. So it had to be secured. So there were larger issues of coordination, cooperation, understanding the big picture, understanding the milieu, the environment in which we operate, the threat perception that are there, the threats that are out there, and how to tackle them. So I think that Pakistan participated enthusiastically and constructively in this deliberative process. It was not about Pakistan. It's not about one specific country. But your point is very important. Some studies have been published recently, and they date back to 2011, as a matter of fact, saying that Pakistan has the fastest growing nuclear program, which is not correct. Our program is developing at a very moderate pace in response to the threat perception that we have, to keep our nuclear deterrent effective and credible. And in this effort, we are succeeding. So I think that this combination that people make, for instance, they say that there is militancy in a country, and then there are nuclear weapons, and they think that they would at one point cohabit. This is not true. The reason is that Pakistan has a very strong command and control system. We have the National Command Authority. It oversees nuclear employment and deployment, and it oversees all aspects, operational, tactical. So the other thing is that, I can enumerate a number of steps that Pakistan has taken. We have an independent regulatory system. We have an export control regime, which is one of the best, which is harmonized with the other multilateral export control regimes, and we have taken these steps voluntarily. And we've been cooperating with the international community. So I think that these steps we have taken. Let me also tell you that nuclear security has been breached most grievously in the United States, and United States President has talked about it, and it's not a secret. In Central Europe, in South Africa, in other parts of the world, recently there was a report published by Harvard Kennedy School which said that India has insider threat as far as its nuclear program is concerned. But Alhamdulillah, up to this day, there has been no breach of nuclear security in Pakistan, because our system covers the entire spectrum: insider threat, outsider threat, cyber security, and there are multiple layers of security. A system which has worked up to this day, and everything is under lock and key. Everything is secure, and no militants can have access to our nuclear assets. No question about
Definitely.
that.
We cannot elaborate the specific procedures and practices in place for our nuclear security. But one thing is that, as you mentioned also, there are testimonials from international observers that ours is one of the finest. But having said that, sir, this comes with a caveat. In the recent past, if you have noticed, when India developed the strategy of cold start, to counter that, Pakistan opted for battlefield tactical nuclear weapons. Now, the Indians have been crying hoarse, and this echo has also been heard, a bit of it, in the United States, that tactical nuclear weapons, they are less secure than the strategic ones because they are out in the battlefield, and there are greater chances of a lower cadre of military officers monitoring them and executing them, plus the chances of their being proliferated or stolen, the threat becomes larger. What are your thoughts about that as an expert, sir?
I'd say that India itself has developed tactical nuclear weapons. We have tactical nuclear weapons, but we developed tactical nuclear weapons in self-defense to bolster our nuclear deterrent. Its capability, its credibility would have been eroded completely if we had not developed tactical nuclear weapons and short-range missiles. Because India, after Kargil, had developed cold start doctrine, and they wanted to eviscerate Pakistan's assets through surprise attack. Although that's a myth, but I mean that they talked about it and then they denied it from time to time.
But their Guderians were actually envisaging something like a blitzkrieg in which they would attack Pakistan and not allow us to use our nuclear weapons and bring us to our knees.
Yes. So our deterrent was bolstered, beefed up, and it is effective. And what's happening, it is an irony that we do not have talks with India. I mean, because these nuclear CBMs are also under the rubric of, can be held under the rubric of bilateral talks, and bilateral talks are stalled. So we are not talking to each other directly. But whenever we meet Indians on the sidelines of conferences, they seldom raise the issue of tactical nuclear weapons, probably in passing. But Americans raise it with vehemence, and we have pointed it out to the Americans that you're speaking on behalf of the Indians. And in fact, I mean, the fact is, and it's a tragedy, that Indians have penetrated into the US administration, US Congress, also think tank community, in the academic institutions.
And even the US media.
And since the diaspora community is very strong, they influence lawmakers in the United States. So the cumulative effect is that the United States ends up speaking on behalf of India. So you haven't heard much from Indians about tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, when they talk about it, they are almost dismissive or blasé about it, as if it won't hurt them at all. But the Americans are much more worried, and we have tried to reassure them that they are not less secure, that they are under the same command and control system, and the theorization about their being insecure is again flawed. So I think that here, I mean, this was not something worrisome. I mean, Americans can say whatever they want to, but you would recall that we have this parallel dialogue going on with the Americans for our access to the nuclear suppliers group, or having a deal, civil nuclear deal, similar to the...
I'm glad you mentioned it. You have preempted my next question.
You can go ahead and ask the question.
No, please, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, but what I was saying that since there's this parallel track, the Americans, through certain leaks, media leaks last year, they, on the eve of the Prime Minister's visit, they tried to hint that Pakistan's entry into the nuclear suppliers group could be facilitated and eased if we agreed to capping or curbing our nuclear weapons warheads and restricting the range of our long-range missile, and they are not long-range, intermediate-range missile, or in fact discarding or curbing the short-range missiles. But our answer to that was no, we can't do that, we won't do that. We would continue to refine our capability to keep it symmetric, to keep it credible. So I think that we do not want any conditionality, any linkage between our access to the nuclear suppliers group and to other multilateral export control regimes and our nuclear weapons system, because the United States has not raised any of these issues with the Indians when they signed the 2005 deal with them, or when they facilitated India's association with the nuclear suppliers group back in 2008. So I think that we have dealt with the situation quite responsibly, and I think that the United States has also been responsible about it because we delink the two things, and while we still have a desire to have access to nuclear technology and to enter into the nuclear suppliers group simultaneously with India, this would not be at the cost of our nuclear program.
Indeed, and Pakistan has made it very clear that it is not willing to sacrifice or roll back its nuclear program just for being accepted or giving parity as far as Indians. We want it on merit. But let's move beyond Pakistan, sir. A lot is being now said about, I mean, we use the word nuclear terrorism, but the threat to nuclear assets because of, let's say, the ingress of groups like the Daesh or ISIL or ISIS, whatever they are known as. What are your thoughts there, sir?
You know, again, some of these reports are very speculative or sensationalized about Daesh getting access to nuclear weapons. In fact, in one of their magazines, or the one magazine that they have, Dabiq, they said that they would get them from Pakistan. And this was a hostile act. And I was wondering who is behind them, because they have this entire black market in the Middle East. And why mention Pakistan? Because they have no linkage with Pakistan.
It is with a malicious intent.
With malicious intent that this has been publicized, and this is now used by these analysts. Now, let me tell you something, that one needs more literacy, in fact, on nuclear issues, because right now, I mean, of course, you can't take terrorism lightly, and you can't take nuclear terrorism lightly. But at the same time, I think there's been a hype. There's no empirical evidence that nuclear terrorism is an imminent threat. There's this hype about it because it's not easy to manufacture a nuclear bomb. What people are trying to say is that there is a threat of a radiological dispersal device, which is called RDD or dirty bomb. And you can get some material, and then you can put together a bomb, and it would scare the population, immobilize a city, or throw it into panic. So that is a possibility, but not nuclear terrorism. There is no evidence. I don't want to sound belittling these analyses. What I want to say is that, for instance, I mean, if you look at the materials, a dirty bomb would use cesium-137, or it would use cobalt, but it would not be using HUU or separated plutonium. So I think that we should remain vigilant, of course. Nuclear security is all about vigilance. It's about cooperation, it's coordination within the state, among the state institutions and within other nations. But at the same time, I mean, there should be vigilance, but there should be no alarmism. And there should be no sensationalization. So I think that while I'm not entirely dismissive, at the same time I would say that we should take a very balanced, well-considered approach.
Indeed, sir. But you see, nuclear security has two aspects. One is safety, the other is security. We've talked a lot about security. How about safety? I mean, factors like, let's say, what happened at Fukushima, or in the USA, you mentioned in the passing, but you didn't name it, the 3 Mile Island reactor, or in Chernobyl, and so on. So what steps are being considered for nuclear safety, sir?
After the Fukushima accident, we conducted stress tests for our nuclear power plants. They were found to be fit. Since then, some very rigorous procedures have been introduced, and all licensees have to comply with them. So I think we are alert to that situation. I think accidents can happen anywhere. They happen in Japan. Japan is one of the most responsible countries. They pay a lot of attention to nuclear security and safety. So we are conscious of that fact too. So we've taken a number of measures to upgrade our procedures and methods to deal with the safety issues. Safety is important, but let me tell you that there is an interface between security and safety. Safety is about locks and fences, and security is about theft, or theft can be of any kind. I mean, it can be physical theft, it can be tangible or intangible transfers, also transfers of know-how, and I think that we have procedures in place to guard against such catastrophes.
Now, having discussed this in general, sir, the Nuclear Security Summit, as you rightly mentioned, this is probably the fourth and the final one. What future is there for another organization, or let's say something on the types or on the same parallel as the Nuclear Security Summit coming up in future, because it's a very important subject for the entire world?
The issue or the responsibility of nuclear security cannot be confined to the 4 summits agenda. It predates the summit process, and it would continue to be relevant to the nations all around the world, even after the summit process comes to an end. There has been a lot of discussion about successor arrangements after the summit process comes to an end. And there were many suggestions. I mean, some were advocating creating parallel mechanisms, or some wanted to use treaty language, some which could be codified later on, to create a new network. But this was resisted by many countries, including Pakistan. And now I think that the most likely and the most desirable course of action is that the international organizations and international or multilateral initiatives should reabsorb the NSS agenda. And what are these organizations? I mentioned them earlier. One is IAEA, the other is United Nations, particularly its 1540 committee. Then, of course, Interpol is a player, and then you have 2 initiatives. One is GICNT, Global Initiative to Combat Terrorism, and Global Partnership. So I think that they should reabsorb the agenda, but it was Pakistan's point of view, and it was supported by many of the NSS participants, that IAEA should remain the focal point. Why? Because it has the necessary expertise and experience to handle these issues. It has the requisite competence. It has cumulative experience of several decades. It has a nuclear security division within the IAEA Secretariat. It's already addressing these issues. And I think that since I think it was a couple of years ago, that IAEA has been holding these nuclear security conferences at the ministerial level, and they've been successful. One thing that I want to mention, that NSS process was not universal, because you have in the IAEA, you have about 168 members, and in the United Nations you have about 192 member states, and the states which have nuclear energy or nuclear material in one form or the other are about 76, although some say that the number has been reduced because of the steps that have been taken recently. I think that now the countries that produce nuclear material has been reduced from 52 to 24, around that figure. So I think that it is necessary, I'm still responding to your question, it is necessary to make the NSS process or nuclear security process more inclusive. It should not be confined to a group of 50 countries, because when you're talking about transportation security or when you're talking about illicit trafficking, then you're not talking about just these 50 countries. You're talking about the international community. And the IAEA is therefore, I think, all said and done, is the most appropriate forum to make this agenda more inclusive and to associate other countries with this effort. And this it has already done by holding the ministerial conferences on nuclear security.
Right. But there's one more aspect I solicit your opinion on. You mentioned, sir, that the NSS, the Nuclear Security Summit, is not targeting any one country or is against any one country. But one country which is likely to be discussed today and tomorrow, US time, is North Korea and its recent nuclear tests. Mm-hmm. Would you care to comment on that, sir?
Well, that's a real threat. I remember last time, 2014, when I was in The Hague, and the Prime Minister was there, in fact. The Ukraine issue was shadowing the conference, because at that time the tensions were very high between the United States and the Russian Federation. Way back in 2012, it was North Korea again, because the 2012 summit was held in Seoul. And I think that initially before the summit, North Korea had issued some threats, given some threats, and those threats were being taken very seriously by South Koreans. But they did not disrupt the NSS there.
Right.
This time also, I think since the world leaders would be there, the relevant actors and stakeholders would be there, they would be discussing North Korea. But there are other forums. I think that these stakeholders have been discussing this issue in the United Nations Security Council. China would be there, United States is there, and they are trying to, United States is trying to help its allies, Japan, South Korea. It's worried because of the provocative posture that North Korea has assumed. And China has been trying to exercise its restraining influence over Pyongyang, but it hasn't worked. So there is volatility in the behavior and posture of North Korea. It's natural that when leaders are gathered there, they'd be discussing this issue. But would they be able to make any operative decision? I doubt that, because the dynamics of the North Korean issue are much more complex, and they can't yield to an easy solution. At the same time, I think that a discussion on this issue is relevant, because you may take all the measures for nuclear security, but if one nuclear bomb is fired or dropped, then it would disrupt the entire process. And that's why the international community and the relevant actors, they have to take necessary measures and precautions. And this is precisely what they are doing.
True, sir. So let's come back to Pakistan before I end the program. You mentioned that Pakistan is a very responsible nuclear weapon state. But still, what more should Pakistan be doing to allay some of the suspicions and also to keep the protagonists and detractors of our nuclear program at bay?
I think on ground, the reality is sound. Our narrative is deficient. We can't put across our point of view effectively. We can't communicate to the people, to other interlocutors, what steps we have taken. We are succeeding. Let me tell you that Arms Control Association on the eve of the Nuclear Security Summit published a report, and it issued a matrix with that report. And these are report cards for Pakistan and India. I brought them with me. And let me tell you that this is Pakistan's report card and this is India's report card. Let me also give you this instance that under the heading Progress on Nuclear and Radiological Security, it lists 3 steps that Pakistan has taken: upgraded security measures at more than a dozen medical centers with Category 1 sources, others too. And then the last one is participation in joint statements. For India, it says none, right? And it hasn't contributed much to the security NSS process. Pakistan has. What I'm trying to say is, and reassure you, that
reassure our viewers,
and through you, the viewers, that although there are negative stories about Pakistan, the West from time to time, the Western analysts and their think tanks and their NGOs do recognize the contribution that Pakistan is making, and there is acknowledgement, albeit grudgingly, of Pakistan's contribution to nuclear security and also towards stabilizing global nuclear order.
Well put, sir. And that's very reassuring. Viewers, with that we conclude this particular discussion. It has been very heartening to listen to Ambassador Masood Khan, who for 6 years has represented Pakistan on this very important forum, the Nuclear Security Summit. What has transpired is that in the bargain, Pakistan has emerged as a very mature and a very responsible player, although it has not been given the due recognition. But the fact remains, and actually the fault lies perhaps with us, that our narrative has not been all that eloquent about the steps which Pakistan has taken. But Pakistan has been trying to reassure the world that it is not only a responsible nuclear weapon state, but it also knows how to safeguard its assets, both from the security and from the safety point of view. Pakistan may be surrounded by terrorists, by the actual acts of terrorism and militancy, but our nuclear assets remain safe, and we are committed to keeping them safe. As far as Pakistan's acceptance in the nuclear suppliers group and a few other amenities which have been granted to India or are going to be granted to India, Pakistan has been reluctant in the pound of flesh which was being asked for it to pass on. Pakistan would not compromise its nuclear program at any cost, but it would remain a responsible nuclear weapon state. The Nuclear Security Summit is going to conclude this particular year, but we hope that something of its parallel, or at least the International Atomic Energy Agency, is going to continue playing an important role in keeping the world safe from nuclear disasters. I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Masood Khan. It was a pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much. Viewers, keep watching us. Hope to see you in the next program, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.